Hi, it's Vanessa Love. All right, so I got a sad email the other day, and I don't. It took me a while to process it and figure out exactly what I feel, and I it's all around sad. And so the email that I received was that Whiting, the um, it's the institution for people in Connecticut who have been deemed not mentally stable to go forward with trial, end up going to Whiting. 31 people were suspended. 9 people were arrested for a video that came forward from a whistleblower that showed that staff was kicking and abusing a patient while he slept. So not many of my friends, even the ones who still work in the institutions, know about this. So it's kind of a shock. And just kind of out of nowhere, because the whistleblower came forward in April. The Hartford Courant wrote their expose on it in June, and now things are coming around after an investigation from the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services to say exactly what happened. And it's sad. It's sad, and it's sad on so many levels. Before I left the institution where I was working, which was not Whiting, it was in Westport, what had happened was someone who was known violent had been admitted. And it seemed like after I left, things got a lot worse. So this person who was not supposed to be admitted, because we are not a facility that is for people who are violent. We don't get hazard pay. We don't have anything we basically have a resort. If you've ever been to a camp where, there's kind of a high turnover rate, you have to, make sure everything's really sterile. Honestly, there was no outside air. It was all recirculated. If you could imagine a place like that, and here we are, moving, this person, for the most part, the people who came in were safe and wonderful and, just needed a little place to go, and then they were off on their way, right? No big deal. Well, this was a big deal, to have someone who was admitted who was not, should not have been, first of all, and was not appropriate for our program. They did what they had to do in order to make everyone safe, but before that happened, this patient punched out two of my coworkers and bent back the thumb of one of the nurses. So very scary, not a great situation to be in. As I said, they did what they had to do. So that's the type of violent person who would be at Whiting, and they get hazard pay. It is understood that at some point they are going to be assaulted at work. Even working in the facility that I worked in, we had spit guards sometimes for patients, because they would have a bad day, and we would have to surround them and put hands on, and they would start spitting. And there were all sorts of things. Okay, let me make it clear, we never used straitjackets. We were able to put these kind of straps on the bed and keep people's hands next to them, and put their feet and safe, make sure that their feet were safe. If they started to get up, because that's what some people did when you know, basically strap them to a bed, we had a net that we could put over them. Everything was safe. They were not allowed to be in any of the restraints for longer than 24 hours, right? Yeah. And every 2 hours they were allowed to be out of the restraints for a couple of minutes to determine if they were okay. It was only one time when I worked there that someone needed to be in restraints for longer than 8 hours. Usually, like, 8 hours was like, it was enough. 2 hours was usually max. So I want to make that clear, that we weren't just like one of these facilities that had, these terrible restraints or whatever. And I mean, with that comes a lot of stuff where there is a sort of, there's the unspoken rule of don't narc on your, on your colleagues unless everyone hates them. And even if you hate them, just kind of wait. This is terrible. I've never participated in this, by the way. You just wait for someone else, some violent patient, to come along and really do damage. There was a woman, I didn't particularly like her, but I wasn't about to write her off. Apparently she pissed off everyone, and she worked there. So when someone started banging her head against the desk, no one really stopped them right away. Unsafe work environment, just by the way. And one of my close colleagues was kind of in that, in that space with a lot of people. And I wouldn't be surprised if no one cared or were slow to react if someone attacked her. I mean, luckily, I don't know that ever happened. But there were other people who were nice and wonderful and just giving. And I don't know. I know what else to say. They were like these very caring people. And, like, as far as I know, there was something that happened to this woman's shoulder and blood was involved. I have no idea what else happened because the person who was talking to me about it was so traumatized by going onto the unit and seeing blood, this person's blood, that she didn't say anything. And the only thing that my coworker, who actually had this experience, ever said was she was getting what is that called? Physical therapy on her shoulder. So there was kind of that situation going on. So to have a whistleblower come forward and to have 31 people involved, that is bullshit. Like, that is such a failure of the system. I mean, I can't believe that it got that bad. I mean, it's still mind-blowing. It's still mind-blowing. Like, I can't believe that something like that could happen. So, I don't know about the whole situation. But I can tell you that the way that the institution where I was working was going was probably in a similar direction. Because there were people who were violent being admitted. And after I left, pictures came forward from my very, very sweet coworker, and he had scratches all up and down his arm from one of the adolescent clients. It's not acceptable. It's not acceptable. But what they were doing was they were working a lot of people for 16 hours, which is it's a very stressful job to begin with. And then to have the people on the front lines being paid basically a little bit more than minimum wage, it's stressful. Okay, so then you have these basically workhorse workers who are supposed to be there and supposed to like put their needs aside, and this becomes basically their all-encompassing life. And then there was not an opportunity to have any of these people receive what we call supervision. Supervision is where you sit down with your supervisor and you say, fuck, I don't know what to do with this. Fuck, I am having so much trouble trying to work with this person. They're so symptomatic. They're so awful. They're vile. They're, whatever. You have to have that without the penalty of, your pay or whatnot. Because you need to know how to be a better worker. And when that doesn't happen, and there's been a lot of agencies that I've worked in where that never happened, you don't have the chance to grow, and you don't have the chance to feel supported in your growth. So you have all of these, clients who, are leaving. Like, the turnaround for clients is very high because, honestly, the most money that any of these institutions get is when there's a new patient. All the assessments are much more than, the regular, weekly or daily, group therapy, visits with the social worker, that type of thing. Okay. I mean, luckily after I left, there was a little bit of reform about restraints because I believe it was New York State that had a couple of problems with people dying in restraints because they weren't being watched. And that wasn't our protocol anyway. So once you were once you were restrained, you had a CO, a constant observation. So you had someone in the room with you, kind of checking in with you, or just sitting quietly and making sure that you were okay. They weren't the type to ignore someone who was gagging. They weren't the type to ignore someone who was, having problems. And, a nurse would come in and check, as I said. I think that was every 15 minutes for pulse and everything to make sure everything was fine, and to ask questions like, are you calm now? Can you conduct yourself? I kind of patronizing, but, these are the questions we had to ask, right? So in these places, Whiting, I can only imagine. And I can imagine that it was a very similar situation, not receiving any supervision. And that is it's definitely going to lead to something bad if that continues. And I mean, Jesus, you had enough people there who were frustrated who did this crap, and the person was asleep. The person was asleep. There's no justification. Even if he was a terrible, rotten person during the day, why would you be so mean as to get him in his sleep? To wake him up, to kick him, it's terrible. But it must be some sort of shitty work environment too, because no normal person wakes up in the morning and says, hey, I'm gonna go abuse that guy today. Something has to give, something had to happen. And I mean, Jesus, I would love to know what happened, but I may never know, and you may never know. But this is one of those things where it's just like, where were the managers? Where was any of the checks and balances here? Why was this allowed to go on? How do you even not document bruises? This is ridiculous. And it's very sad. It's very sad that this happened somewhere. And I mean, I'm used to knowing the other end. I'm used to knowing that California had a bunch of places where it was just a matter of time before you were beaten. There was that very sad case of I think it was Sonoma, where they had this mental health institution, and some of the people were allowed to, work up so that they could walk around the grounds, and the social worker was in between buildings, and it wasn't monitored. This guy killed her. Like, it's just one of those things where I'm just like, oh my God, like, you have to worry about both sides, and, honestly, some of the stuff that was happening at the company that I was leaving was they were setting up all of the workers to make sure that if the workers ever got injured in any way at any time on the property, that they could pass it off to the workers and say, well, we have the safety thing. They released us from liability because they signed these things that said that they understood their job. But then a security guard got in the middle of an argument between a patient at a different site, and he was like written up because he was injured in that tussle. And so I mean, basically telling a security guard that it's his fault that he got injured in the middle of breaking up an argument and a physical fight between two patients is fucking ridiculous. Like, there is never a need for that shit. Like, I can't, like, I get that they wanted to secure themselves and make sure that they were safe from any sort of liability or any sort of lawsuit, but, like, especially because my coworker did sue them. But my other coworkers didn't. My other coworker who was punched out never wanted to basically he thought that it was like a gift horse, like this job was wonderful for him, and he didn't want to he didn't want to sue them. And I thought that was the wrong way. I really did, especially because, like, he would be in the middle of doing his job and he got pushed over a sofa because two people started fighting. He wasn't even involved. Like, there was just, he got pushed over. And this is the same one that got punched out. Probably like a month or two later, which was like, oh my God, you lost teeth. Go and sue this company. And he refused, So I got out when I did because people started warning me, and it wasn't that I particularly knew what was going on, or I particularly, like, this place was giving, any signs or anything, but, like, I don't know, there was something in the deep unconscious of many people who were like, you probably should get out of this, and honestly, it wasn't the place for me. I don't like facilitating groups. I was not good at that point, although I test well on it, but, because I've been tested on it. But, it was not my forte. I'd rather just be one-on-one with someone so that I can get to really, really know them and really have a chance to, like, work on them, directly, and not, hey, you have 3 days and 5 groups with this person. What do you want them to know before they leave? Oh, well, okay. I guess I'll figure that out, So it's bad on both ends. I don't think that the administration usually understands the limitations that they put on the workers, and the more limitations they put on the patients, the more frustrating it is for everyone on the front lines. Yeah, I can't imagine being institutionalized and knowing that I can't have a belt, I can't have scissors, I can't have cell phone or radio or, watch what I want to watch on TV. You're allowed to have books, but if you'd rather spend time with your books than going to groups, then you might have to stay there longer, which I think is a shitty thing to do to anyone. There's so many things wrong, and, like, it's almost one of those things where I'm like, hey, come on, let's have another Nellie Bly and figure this out and figure out that things have to change. Now, I mean, at least there's safety. At least, you know, there's a place for people to go when they're not feeling safe. But, I mean, there was an incident before I left as well where one of the other patients was blamed for her for her injury because she led another patient on. She was being nice, and that's usually what women are told to do. And when she said, you know, I actually don't think I want to, you know, be a part of this, the guy didn't know how to respond, so he again like took her face and, you know, bashed it into a table, you know. And he was moved to a different part of the hospital, but it was still, that was allowed to happen because he timed when the mental health workers would be there, the frontline people would be there, and when they wouldn't. You know, it's kind of, it's, you know, these people, some of these people know all of our routines, all of our tricks, all of our, you know, all of our everything, and, you know, they do take full advantage of that. But at the same time, I hope that none of the people who were ever institutionalized when I was at that hospital were ever beaten. I mean, as far as I know, they weren't. There was never any claims for that, and now it's been like 8-9 years. So, you know, it's kind of like, well, that should have come out by now, right? Yeah, so there's just an all-around need for change, and it's going to take more instances like this in order to really have that change and to really examine what the fuck is going on in these places. And, you know, people are like, no, you never want to be sent there. Well, you may need to be sent there. And I want you to be safe when you go there, because I don't think it's fair for you to want to get away to some place because you're not feeling safe in the world, and to have all these threats put against you and possibly violence against you, because it's ridiculous. That's not what these places are for. You know, that place is for people who aren't competent to stand trial. You know, how can you tell me that any of those people deserve it unless they're attacking you? You know, and it's totally understandable. Like, some of them probably do attack people. Some of them are probably very fucking nasty because, you know, they're almost inhuman. But you know what? Underneath it all, like, they don't deserve to be treated like crap just because, you know, like, they've made their choices, and, you know, their biology doesn't allow them to think normally or act normally. Yeah. And I'm also really surprised that a lot of people haven't heard about this, and I'm the one that's paying attention to my email. Like, I don't even know how I got on this email list, that I got this email that's like, hey, come to us and have this, like, open discussion about what's going on and what we're going to do forward and how this happened. Like, well, thanks. But, like, oh my God, how did this just, oh my God, this happened. Yeah, so it's very, very sad, and I feel sad for everyone involved, because it's just, it's awful, it's terrible, and, you know, I hope that it's resolved in the way that it's supposed to be resolved, and that there's some change that comes out of this, because, I mean, I can't believe that this happened on this big of a scale. It's disheartening. All right, well, thank you for listening, and I hope you have a good day.